The opulent ballroom of the Castillo del Mar resort buzzed with anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering crowd, their light reflecting off the polished marble floors and gilded mirrors. This was no ordinary party. It was the grand family reunion of the infamous Montero clan, hosted by none other than Alejandro Montero himself, the millionaire media mogul whose name graced the covers of countless magazines and whose face was plastered across billboards throughout the. As guests in designer gowns and tailored suits filed in, waitstaff scurried about with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Among them was Sofia Reyes, a petite woman with warm brown eyes and a cascade of dark curls tucked neatly beneath her uniform cap. Her hands trembled slightly as she balanced a tray of delicate flutes, each filled with bubbling golden liquid. Sofia's heart raced, not from the weight of her tray or the frenetic pace of the evening, but from the knowledge that after 5 long years, she would once again come face to face with Alejandro Montero, the man who had stolen her heart, fathered her child, and vanished from her life without a trace. As she weaved through the crowd, Sofia's mind drifted back to that fateful summer when she had first met Alejandro. She had been working as a maid at one of his smaller resorts, barely making ends meet as she pursued her dreams of becoming a chef. Alejandro had arrived for a surprise inspection, his presence causing a flurry of activity among the staff. Their eyes had met across the lobby, and in that moment, Sofia felt as though the world had stopped spinning. Alejandro, captivated by her beauty and grace, had pursued her relentlessly. Despite her better judgment, Sofia had fallen deeply in love with the charismatic millionaire. For 2 blissful months, they had lived in a bubble of passion and romance. Alejandro had whisked her away on his private jet, showered her with gifts, and promised her the world. Sofia had believed every word, every tender caress, every whispered declaration of love. But as summer drew to a close, so too did their affair. Alejandro had left suddenly, citing urgent business matters. He promised to return, to make things right, to give their love a real chance. Sofia had waited, her heart aching with each passing day, until the cruel reality of her situation became impossible to ignore. She was pregnant, and Alejandro was gone. Now, 5 years later, Sofia found herself serving champagne at his family reunion, her secret hidden beneath her starched uniform. Her son, Miguel, was safely tucked away in the resort's staff daycare center, blissfully unaware of the turmoil raging in his mother's heart. As Sofia approached a group of chattering guests, she caught sight of Alejandro across the room. He looked even more handsome than she remembered, his salt and pepper hair artfully styled, his tan skin a testament to countless vacations on sun-soaked beaches. On his arm hung a statuesque blonde, her diamond engagement ring catching the light with every gesture. Sofia's breath caught in her throat. She had known Alejandro was engaged. It had been splashed across every tabloid in the country. But seeing him with his fiancée in person was like a dagger to her heart. "Champagne, Senora?" Sofia offered, her voice barely above a whisper as she approached the couple. Alejandro turned, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as they fell upon Sofia's face. For a moment, recognition flickered in his gaze, and Sofia felt her world tilt on its axis. But as quickly as it had appeared, the look vanished, replaced by the polite disinterest of a wealthy man addressing the health. "Gracias," he murmured, taking 2 glasses from her tray and handing one to his fiancée. If he recognized Sofia, he gave no indication. As Sofia retreated, her cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and anger, she nearly collided with a tall, dark-haired man who bore a striking resemblance to Alejandro. "Watch where you're going," he snapped, steadying himself. "I'm so sorry, Señor," Sofia stammered, recognizing him as Diego Montero, Alejandro's eldest son from his first marriage. Diego's eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "Do I know you from somewhere?" he asked, his tone suspicious. Sofia's heart pounded. "No, Señor, I don't believe we've met. Please excuse me." She hurried away, leaving Diego staring after her with a puzzled expression. As the night wore on, Sofia found herself constantly aware of Alejandro's presence in the room. She watched from afar as he laughed with his guests, played the gracious host, and doted on his beautiful fiancée. With each passing moment, the weight of her secret grew heavier. During a brief lull in her duties, Sofia slipped away to check on Miguel. As she entered the daycare, her son's face lit up with joy. "Mama," he cried, running to her with open arms. Sofia scooped him up, inhaling the sweet scent of his hair. "Hello, my love, are you being a good boy?" Miguel nodded enthusiastically. "I made a drawing, Mama. Look." He proudly held up a crayon sketch of two stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. Sofia's heart clenched as she realized the taller figure bore a striking resemblance to Alejandro. "It's beautiful, mijo," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Who is it?" "It's you and me, Mama," Miguel explained. Then, pointing to the taller figure, he added, "But I made you look like the man in the big picture in the lobby. He looks important, like you." Sofia's blood ran cold. Had Miguel seen a portrait of Alejandro in the resort? The resemblance between father and son was undeniable, and Sofia lived in constant fear that someone would notice. As she hugged Miguel goodbye and prepared to return to the party, Sofia's mind raced. How long could she keep this secret? What would happen if Alejandro discovered the truth? And most importantly, how could she protect her son from the inevitable fallout? Little did Sofia know that across the ballroom, Diego Montero was piecing together a puzzle that would soon shatter the foundations of the Montero family forever. As he watched his father charm the crowd, a nagging suspicion took root in his mind. The waitress's familiar face, her nervous behavior, and now the child he had glimpsed in the staff area. A boy who bore an uncanny resemblance to Alejandro in his youth. Diego's eyes narrowed as he raised his glass in a mock toast. "Well, father," he muttered under his breath, "it seems your past is about to catch up with you. And I, for one, can't wait to watch it all unfold." As the reunion continued into the night, the stage was set for a confrontation that would leave the Montero family, and all of their esteemed guests, utterly speechless. The secrets of the past were bubbling just beneath the surface, ready to explode in a spectacle of passion, betrayal, and long-buried truths. Sofia, unaware of the storm brewing around her, continued to weave through the crowd, her heart heavy with the weight of her secret. As she locked eyes with Alejandro across the room one more time, she couldn't help but wonder, how much longer could she keep the truth hidden? And at what cost? The night was still young, and the most shocking revelations were yet to come. The Montero family reunion was about to become the backdrop for a drama that would rival the most outrageous telenovela, and at its center, a humble waitress with a secret that could bring an empire to its knees. The Castillo del Mar ballroom continued to pulse with the energy of the Montero family reunion. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a golden glow on the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits below. Amid the clinking of champagne glasses and the hum of excited conversation, Sofia Reyes felt as though she were navigating a minefield, each step fraught with the danger of exposure. As she maneuvered through the crowd with her tray of hors d'oeuvres, Sofia couldn't shake the feeling of Diego Montero's piercing gaze following her every move. Alejandro's eldest son had been watching her intently since their near collision earlier in the evening, his dark eyes narrowed in suspicion. Sofia's heart raced every time she caught sight of him, fear coursing through her veins like ice water. Across the room, Alejandro Montero held court, his arm draped possessively around his fiancée's waist. Valentina Fuentes was the picture of elegance in a shimmering gold gown that hugged her curves and accentuated her model-like figure. Her blonde hair was swept up in an intricate updo, revealing a neck adorned with diamonds that could have fed a small country for a year. Sofia watched as Valentina laughed at something Alejandro whispered in her ear, her head thrown back in practiced mirth. The sight made Sofia's stomach churn with a potent mixture of jealousy and resentment. She couldn't help but remember a time when she had been the one on Alejandro's arm, basking in the warmth of his attention. As if sensing her gaze, Alejandro looked up, his eyes meeting Sofia's across the crowded room. For a split second, the mask of the confident tycoon slipped, revealing a flicker of, was it recognition? Regret? Before Sofia could decipher the emotion, it was gone, replaced by the polite indifference he had shown her earlier. Sofia quickly averted her gaze, her cheeks burning. She silently chastised herself for allowing Alejandro to affect her so deeply after all these years. She was here to work, to provide for her son, their son, and nothing more. Yet, as she stole another glance at the man who had once promised her the world, she couldn't help but wonder what might have been. Meanwhile, Diego Montero had cornered his younger half-sister, Isabella, by the bar. "Have you noticed anything odd about that waitress?" he asked, gesturing subtly towards Sofia. Isabella rolled her eyes, clearly uninterested in her brother's conspiratorial tone. "Which one? There must be a dozen waitresses here tonight." "The one with the dark curls," Diego pressed. "She seems familiar somehow, and I can't shake the feeling that she's hiding something." "Oh, for heaven's sake, Diego," Isabella sighed, taking a sip of her martini. "Not everything is a mystery to be solved. She's probably just nervous about serving the great Alejandro Montero and his esteemed guests." But Diego wasn't convinced. He couldn't explain it, but something about the waitress nagged at him, like a half-remembered dream. As he watched her navigate the room, he noticed how she seemed to tense up whenever Alejandro was nearby, how her eyes lingered on him when she thought no one was looking. Determined to uncover the truth, Diego decided to do some digging. He discreetly approached one of the event coordinators, a harried-looking woman with a clipboard and an earpiece. "Excuse me," he said, flashing his most charming smile. "I was wondering if you could help me with something. That waitress over there, the one with the curly hair, what's her name?" The coordinator glanced at Sofia, then back at Diego with a frown. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't generally give out information about our staff." Diego leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "I understand, but this is important. You see, I think she might be an old friend of the family, and I'd hate to let her slip away without saying hello." The coordinator hesitated for a moment before relenting. "Her name is Sofia Reyes. She's been with us for about 6 months now. That's all I can tell you." "Sofia Reyes," Diego murmured, the name tickling something in the back of his mind. "Thank you. You've been very helpful." As Diego pondered this new information, Sofia found herself face to face with Valentina Fuentes. The statuesque blonde-eyed Sofia with thinly veiled disdain as she plucked a canapé from her tray. "You're new here, aren't you?" Valentina asked, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Sofia nodded, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Yes, Senora, I started a few months ago." Valentina's eyes narrowed. Well, just a word of advice. Alejandro likes his events to run flawlessly. I'd hate to see you lose your job over any mishaps." The threat in Valentina's words was clear, and Sofia felt a chill run down her spine. "Of course, Senora, I'll be extra careful." As Valentina sauntered away, Sofia released a shaky breath. She hadn't expected Alejandro's fiancé to be so openly hostile. Was it possible that Valentina sensed something amiss? Or was this simply the way she treated all the staff? Sofia's musings were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom. A hush fell over the crowd as all eyes turned to the new arrival. Sofia's heart nearly stopped as she recognized the distinctive gait and salt and pepper hair of Alejandro's father, the formidable Don Francisco Montero. The old man moved slowly, leaning heavily on an ornate cane, but his presence commanded respect from everyone in the room. Alejandro rushed to greet his father, helping him to a seat at the head table. "Papa," Alejandro said, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "We weren't sure you'd make it. Welcome." Don Francisco's eyes swept the room, taking in the opulent decorations and the gathered guests. When his gaze fell on Sofia, she felt as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. Unlike his son, there was no mistaking the flash of recognition in the old man's eyes. Sofia remembered all too well the day she had met Don Francisco, 5 years ago. It had been near the end of her whirlwind romance with Alejandro, and the old man had made his disapproval abundantly clear. He had called her a gold digger, a nobody unworthy of the Montero name. His words had cut deep, planting seeds of doubt that had contributed to her decision to keep her pregnancy a secret. Now, as Don Francisco's penetrating gaze bore into her, Sofia felt those old wounds reopen. She wanted nothing more than to disappear, to grab Miguel and run as far away from the Monteros as she could. But she was trapped, bound by the need to provide for her son and the inescapable pull of the past. As the party resumed its lively pace, Sofia found herself constantly aware of Don Francisco's presence. She noticed how his eyes followed her as she moved about the room, how he leaned in to whisper something to Alejandro, causing his son to glance in her direction with a furrowed brow. The weight of her secret felt heavier than ever, threatening to crush her beneath its burden. Sofia longed to check on Miguel, to hold him close and draw strength from his innocent love. But she knew she couldn't risk another trip to the daycare center, not with so many suspicious eyes watching her every move. As the night wore on, the alcohol flowed freely, and inhibitions began to lower. Guests laughed more loudly, danced more wildly, and the atmosphere took on a decidedly more raucous tone. Sofia found herself busier than ever, refilling glasses and clearing away empty plates. It was during one of these moments, as she bent to retrieve a fallen napkin, that she felt a hand grasp her arm. She straightened up, coming face to face with Diego Montero. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. Now. Before Sofia could protest, Diego was steering her towards a secluded corner of the ballroom, hidden from view by a large potted palm. Her mind raced, trying to come up with a plausible excuse, a way to deflect whatever accusations he might be about to level at her. "Who are you really, Sofia Reyes?" Diego demanded, his dark eyes boring into hers. "And what is your connection to my father?" Sofia's mouth went dry. She opened her lips to speak, but no words came out. How could she possibly explain the tangled web of love, betrayal, and secrecy that bound her to the Montero family? Just as she was about to attempt a response, a commotion erupted on the dance floor. Guests were scrambling to get out of the way as Don Francisco Montero swayed dangerously, his face ashen. Alejandro rushed to his father's side, catching him just as the old man's knees buckled. "Someone call an ambulance," Alejandro shouted, lowering his father gently to the ground. In the chaos that ensued, Sofia slipped away from Diego, her heart pounding. As she watched paramedics arrive and whisk Don Francisco away on a stretcher, a sick feeling of dread settled in her stomach. Somehow, she knew that this was only the beginning of the storm that was about to engulf them all. Across the room, Valentina Fuentes watched the unfolding drama with narrowed eyes. She had noticed the way Sofia had reacted to Don Francisco's arrival, the furtive glances exchanged between them. And she certainly hadn't missed Diego cornering the waitress in a secluded spot. Valentina's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she clenched her fists. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let some insignificant waitress threaten her position as the future Mrs. Alejandro Montero. Whatever secrets this Sofia Reyes was hiding, Valentina vowed to uncover them, and use them to her advantage. As the ambulance sped away, its sirens piercing the night, the guests began to disperse. The grand Montero family reunion had come to an abrupt and shocking end, but the real drama was just beginning to unfold. Sofia, her nerves frayed to the breaking point, rushed to collect Miguel from the daycare center. As she held her sleepy son close, inhaling his familiar scent, she knew that her carefully constructed world was on the verge of shattering. "Mama?" Miguel mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "What's wrong?" Sofia forced a smile, running her fingers through his unruly curls, so like his father's. "Nothing, Amor. Everything's going to be all right." But as she carried Miguel out of the resort, feeling the weight of Diego's suspicion and Don Francisco's recognition pressing down on her, Sofia knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The secrets of the past were clawing their way to the surface, and she was powerless to stop them. In the coming days, the lives of the Monteros, and the humble waitress who held the key to their most shocking secret, would be turned upside down. Loyalties would be tested, alliances forged and broken, and the true meaning of family would be called into question. As Sofia hailed a taxi, casting one last glance at the glittering Castillo del Mar resort, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of a life-altering revelation. The truth about Miguel's paternity, so long buried, was threatening to explode into the open with all the force of a volcanic eruption. Little did she know that back in the emptying ballroom, Diego Montero was already making plans. With a determined glint in his eye, he pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "It's me," he said when the call connected. I need you to dig up everything you can on a woman named Sofia Reyes. And I mean everything. As he hung up, Diego's gaze fell on a family portrait hanging on the wall. Alejandro, flanked by his children from his first marriage. But now, looking at his father's face, Diego could see something he'd never noticed before. A resemblance to the little boy he'd glimpsed in the staff area earlier that evening. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and Diego Montero was determined to see the whole picture, no matter the cost. The Montero family reunion may have ended, but the real fireworks were yet to come. The days following the tumultuous Montero family reunion were a whirlwind of tension and uncertainty. Sofia Reyes found herself caught in a maelstrom of emotions, torn between her desire to protect her son and the growing fear that her carefully guarded secret was on the verge of exposure. As she arrived for her shift at the Castillo del Mar resort, Sofia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The other staff members whispered behind their hands, their eyes following her as she made her way through the service corridors. Had word of her connection to the Monteros somehow leaked? Or was she simply paranoid, her guilty conscience playing tricks on her mind? Meanwhile, across town in the sterile confines of San Rafael Hospital, Alejandro Montero paced the waiting room like a caged lion. His father, Don Francisco, had been admitted following his collapse at the reunion, and the doctors were running a battery of tests to determine the cause. "Mr. Montero," a nurse called, causing Alejandro to whirl around. "Your father is asking for you." Alejandro nodded, straightening his tie before following the nurse down the long, antiseptic hallway. As he entered his father's private room, he was struck by how small and frail the once imposing Don Francisco looked, dwarfed by the hospital bed and tangle of monitoring equipment. "Papa," Alejandro said softly, taking a seat beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" Don Francisco's eyes, still sharp despite his weakened state, fixed on his son's face. "Alejandro," he wheezed, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk about the waitress." Alejandro froze, a chill running down his spine. "Waitress? What waitress, Papa? Don't play dumb with me, boy," Don Francisco snapped, some of his old fire returning. "The girl from 5 years ago. Sofia, I saw her at the reunion." Alejandro's mind raced. Sofia? Could it really have been her? He had thought he'd recognized her, but he'd convinced himself it was impossible. What were the odds? "Papa, I don't understand. What about Sofia?" Don Francisco's gnarled hand shot out, grasping Alejandro's wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me carefully, Alejandro. That girl, she had a secret. A secret that could destroy everything we've built." Before Alejandro could press for more information, Don Francisco's grip loosened, his eyes fluttering closed as he drifted into an uneasy sleep. Alejandro sat back, his head spinning. What secret could Sofia possibly have that would threaten the Montero empire? And why, after all these years, was she back in their lives? As Alejandro grappled with these questions, across the city, Diego Montero was engrossed in his own investigation. His contact, a discreet but highly effective private investigator named Javier, had just delivered a thick folder of information on Sofia Reyes. Diego's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages, each revelation more shocking than the last. Employment records, financial statements, and most damning of all, a birth certificate for a child born 5 years ago, a son named Miguel Reyes. "No father listed," Diego murmured, his suspicions growing stronger by the second. He pulled out his phone, quickly dialing a number. "Isabella, I need you to meet me. Now, there's something you need to see." While the Montero siblings delved deeper into Sofia's past, Valentina Fuentes was conducting an investigation of her own. The statuesque blonde sat at her vanity, phone pressed to her ear as she applied her makeup with practiced precision. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed into the phone. "I want to know every detail of that waitress's life. Who she talks to, where she goes, what she eats for breakfast. Do you understand?" Valentina's eyes narrowed as she listened to the response. "Good. And remember, discretion is key. If Alejandro finds out I'm looking into this, it could ruin everything." As she hung up, Valentina caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was beautiful, polished, and utterly ruthless. She had clawed her way up from nothing to secure her position as Alejandro Montero's fiancé, and she'd be damned if she'd let some insignificant waitress threaten her future. Back at the Castillo del Mar, Sofia was finding it increasingly difficult to concentrate on her duties. Every time the door opened, she flinched, half expecting to see Alejandro or Diego burst in to confront her. The weight of her secret was becoming unbearable, pressing down on her chest until she could hardly breathe. During her break, Sofia slipped away to a quiet corner of the staff lounge, pulling out her phone to check on Miguel. Her son was staying with a neighbor, a kindly older woman who had become something of a surrogate grandmother to the boy. "Hola, Señora Gomez," Sofia said when the call connected. "How's Miguel doing?" "Oh, he's a little angel as always," Señora Gomez replied, her voice warm. "But Sofia, dear, he's been asking questions again. About his father." Sofia's heart clenched. "What? What did you tell him?" "Only what you've always said, that his papa had to go away before he was born." "But Sofia, the boy is getting older. He's starting to notice that other children have fathers. How long can you keep this up?" Tears pricked at Sofia's eyes as she ended the call. How long indeed? With the Monteros closing in from all sides, it seemed only a matter of time before the truth came to light. But what would that mean for Miguel? For her? The thought of Alejandro swooping in, using his wealth and influence to take her son away, was almost too much to bear. As Sofia composed herself and prepared to return to work, she was startled by a hand on her shoulder. She whirled around, coming face to face with Isabella Montero. "We need to talk," Isabella said, her expression unreadable. "Now." Before Sofia could protest, Isabella was steering her towards an empty conference room. As the door clicked shut behind them, Sofia's mind raced, trying to come up with a plausible explanation, an escape route, anything to avoid the confrontation she'd been dreading for 5 long years. "Sit," Isabella commanded, gesturing to a chair. As Sofia complied, Isabella began to pace, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. "I'm going to ask you a series of questions," Isabella said, her tone clipped and businesslike. "I expect you to answer truthfully. Do you understand?" Sofia nodded mutely, her throat too dry to form words. 5 years ago, did you have a relationship with my father, Alejandro Montero?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sofia closed her eyes, feeling as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. With a deep breath, she opened them again, meeting Isabella's gaze. "Yes," she whispered. Isabella's expression remained neutral, but Sofia could see a muscle twitching in her jaw. "And did this relationship result in a child? A son?" Sofia's world tilted on its axis. How could they know? She'd been so careful, kept everything hidden for so long. But as she looked into Isabella's eyes, she knew that denial was futile. The truth, so long buried, was finally clawing its way to the surface. "Yes," Sofia said again, her voice stronger this time. "I have a son, Miguel, and yes, Alejandro is his father." The admission, once made, seemed to take on a life of its own. Words poured out of Sofia, how she discovered her pregnancy after Alejandro had left, how she'd tried to contact him but been rebuffed by his staff, how she'd ultimately decided to raise Miguel on her own, away from the complicated world of the Monteros. As she spoke, Sofia noticed a change come over Isabella. The icy facade began to crack, revealing glimpses of sympathy and even understanding. "Why now?" Isabella asked when Sofia had finished. "Why come back after all this time?" Sofia shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I didn't come back. I never left. I've been here all along, struggling to make ends meet, to give Miguel the best life I could. It was pure chance that I ended up working here, at one of your father's resorts. I never intended for any of you to find out." Isabella was silent for a long moment, digesting this information. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "You realize this changes everything, don't you? Once my father knows." "No," Sofia cried, panic rising in her chest. "Please, you can't tell him. I know I have no right to ask, but please. Miguel is all I have. If Alejandro finds out, he'll take him away from me. I can't lose my son." Isabella regarded Sofia thoughtfully, a conflict playing out behind her eyes. "I won't lie to my father," she said at last. "But I won't volunteer the information either. You need to tell him yourself, Sofia. Before someone else does." As Isabella turned to leave, Sofia called out, "Wait. What? What will you do now?" Isabella paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know this. You've just turned our world upside down, Sofia Reyes. And the aftershocks are only beginning." As the door closed behind Isabella, Sofia slumped in her chair, the full weight of what had just transpired crashing down upon her. The secret she'd guarded so fiercely for 5 years was out, and there was no telling what the consequences would be. Meanwhile, in his opulent office atop Montero Tower, Alejandro sat lost in thought, his father's cryptic words echoing in his mind. A secret that could destroy everything they'd built. What could Sofia possibly know that held such power? As he pondered this question, his eyes fell on a framed photograph on his desk. A picture of himself as a young boy, standing proudly next to his own father. Something about the image tugged at his memory, a half-formed thought that danced just out of reach. Suddenly, Alejandro sat bolt upright, his eyes wide with realization. The boy he'd glimpsed at the reunion, the child he'd dismissed as just another staff member's kid. Could it be possible? With trembling hands, Alejandro reached for his phone, ready to set in motion a chain of events that would change the lives of everyone involved forever. But before he could dial, the door to his office burst open, revealing a flustered and visibly angry Valentina. "We need to talk," she declared, her eyes flashing dangerously. "About Sofia Reyes." Alejandro's finger hovered over the call button, his mind reeling. How did Valentina know about Sofia? And more importantly, what did she know? As Valentina launched into a tirade, her words a blur of accusations and demands, Alejandro found his thoughts drifting back to that summer 5 years ago. He remembered Sofia's laugh, the warmth of her smile, the way she'd looked at him as though he were the only man in the world. And now, faced with the possibility that their brief affair had produced a child, his son, Alejandro felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. Everything was about to change, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead. Across town, in the tiny apartment she shared with Miguel, Sofia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at a worn photograph hidden away in her nightstand drawer. It showed her and Alejandro, arms wrapped around each other, faces glowing with love and the promise of a future together. With a heavy sigh, Sofia tucked the photo away and reached for her phone. Her finger hovered over Alejandro's name in her contacts, a number she'd never deleted, despite years of telling herself to let go of the past. It was time, she realized, to face the music. To confront Alejandro and tell him the truth, come what may. With a deep breath, Sofia pressed the call button, her heart pounding as the phone began to ring. Little did she know that at that very moment, forces were aligning that would make her revelation seem like merely the opening act in a drama of epic proportions. The Montero family's darkest secrets were about to be laid bare, and no one, not Sofia, not Alejandro, not even the indomitable Don Francisco, would emerge unscathed. As night fell over the city, a storm was brewing, both literally and figuratively. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a fitting backdrop to the tumultuous emotions swirling through the lives of all involved. The stage was set for a confrontation that would leave everyone speechless, and nothing would ever be the same again. The ringing of Alejandro's phone cut through Valentina's tirade like a knife, momentarily stunning both of them into silence. Alejandro's eyes widened as he saw the name flashing on the screen, Sofia Reyes. "Who is it?" Valentina demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. Alejandro hesitated for a split second before answering, "It's her. Sofia." Valentina's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she clenched her fists. "Answer it," she hissed. "Put it on speaker. I want to hear every word." With a sense of impending doom, Alejandro complied, pressing the speaker button as he answered the call. "Sofia," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Alejandro," Sofia's voice came through, tinny and distant yet achingly familiar. "We need to talk. It's important." "I'm listening," Alejandro replied, acutely aware of Valentina's burning gaze fixed upon him. There was a pause, filled only by the sound of Sofia's shaky breathing. Then, not like this. Not over the phone. Can we meet? In person? Before Alejandro could respond, Valentina snatched the phone from his hand. Listen here, you little gold digger, she snarled. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. Stay away from Alejandro, or I'll make sure you regret it. With that, she ended the call, tossing the phone back to a stunned Alejandro. There, she said, a triumphant gleam in her eye. That takes care of that. But Alejandro wasn't listening. His mind was reeling, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed suddenly clicking into place. The urgency in Sofia's voice, his father's cryptic warning, the child he'd glimpsed at the reunion. Could it really be true? I have to go, he said abruptly, rising from his chair. Valentina's eyes narrowed dangerously. Where? To meet her? I need answers, Valentina, Alejandro replied, his voice firm. And I'm going to get them. As he strode out of the office, leaving a fuming Valentina in his wake, Alejandro felt as though he were standing on the edge of a precipice. Whatever happened next would change everything, and there was no going back. Across town, Sofia stared at her phone in disbelief, Valentina's venomous words still ringing in her ears. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected such open hostility. With trembling hands, she dialed another number. Isabella, she said when the call connected. I need your help. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the city, Diego Montero nursed a glass of whiskey, his mind churning with the information he'd uncovered. He'd always known his father wasn't a saint, but this was beyond anything he'd imagined. Another, he growled to the bartender, pushing his empty glass forward. As the amber liquid sloshed into the tumbler, Diego's phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from his contact, Javier. You're not going to believe what I just found, the message read. Call me ASAP. Diego downed his drink in one gulp, threw some bills on the bar, and hurried out into the night. Whatever Javier had discovered, it was clear that the already tangled web of secrets surrounding his family was about to become even more complex. As a foreboding rumble of thunder echoed across the city, Sofia paced nervously in the lobby of the Castillo del Mar. Isabella had agreed to meet her here, away from the prying eyes and ears of the resort staff. Every time the door opened, Sofia's heart leapt into her throat, half expecting to see Alejandro or worse, Valentina, bursting in to confront her. Finally, Isabella arrived, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. All right, Sofia, she said, leading them to a secluded corner. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. And so, Sofia did. She poured out the whole story, her whirlwind romance with Alejandro, the painful separation, the shocking discovery of her pregnancy, and the years of struggle and sacrifice that followed. As she spoke, she could see Isabella's expression softening, the icy facade melting away to reveal genuine empathy. I never meant for any of this to happen, Sofia finished, wiping away tears. I just wanted to give Miguel a good life, away from all the complications of the Montero world. But now, Isabella reached out, squeezing Sofia's hand gently. Now the truth is coming out, whether we like it or not, she said softly. Sofia, you need to tell my father. Before someone else does. As if on cue, both women's phones buzzed simultaneously. They looked down to see the same message, from an unknown number. The truth about the Montero heir will be revealed tonight. Channel 9 News, 9 p.m. Don't miss it. Sofia's blood ran cold. Oh God, she whispered. What have I done? Across the city, similar messages were lighting up the phones of journalists, socialites, and business tycoons. The promise of a scandalous revelation involving the powerful Montero family was too juicy to ignore, and within minutes, the news was spreading like wildfire through social media and gossip columns. In his hospital room, Don Francisco Montero watched the growing frenzy on the small TV mounted on the wall. His weathered face was set in grim lines as he picked up the phone by his bedside, dialing a number he knew by heart. It's time, he said when the call was answered. Bring me the documents. As the clock ticked inexorably towards 9 p.m., The main players in this unfolding drama found themselves drawn together, as if by some invisible force, to the Montero family's sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. Alejandro arrived first, his usual composure shattered by the weight of his suspicions and the cryptic message he'd received. He paced the expansive living room, jumping at every sound, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. Next came Diego, his face dark with barely suppressed anger. He carried a thick folder under his arm, the results of his investigation into Sofia and the Montero family's past. The brothers regarded each other warily, years of rivalry and resentment simmering just beneath the surface. Isabella arrived with Sofia in tow, the unlikely allies presenting a united front as they entered the mansion. Sofia clutched Miguel's hand tightly, the boy wide-eyed and confused by the tension crackling in the air. "Papa?" Miguel whispered, tugging on Sofia's sleeve. "What's going on? Who are these people?" Before Sofia could answer, the door burst open once more, revealing a furious Valentina. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the assembled group, lingering with particular venom on Sofia and Miguel. Well, she sneered. "The gang's all here. How convenient." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch as Valentina stalked over to Alejandro, positioning herself possessively at his side. Sofia instinctively pulled Miguel closer, shielding him from Valentina's hostile glare. "Enough," Alejandro said, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "We're here for answers." "Sofia," he turned to face her, his expression a mixture of confusion, anger, and something softer, almost wistful. "Is it true? Is he my son?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of 5 years of secrets and lies. Sofia opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, another voice cut in. "Why don't we let a DNA test answer that question?" All heads turned to see Don Francisco Montero being wheeled into the room by a nurse, his hospital gown incongruous against the opulent surroundings. Despite his frail appearance, his eyes were sharp as ever, taking in the scene before him with a calculating gaze. "Papa," Alejandro gasped. "You should be in the hospital." Don Francisco waved away his son's concern. "There are more important matters to attend to," he said gravely. "Matters that have been hidden for far too long." With trembling hands, he produced a large envelope from the folds of his robe. "The results of a DNA test," he announced. "Taken without your knowledge, Alejandro, when you last donated blood for your annual physical. And matched against a sample obtained from young Miguel here." Sofia gasped, her mind reeling. How had they gotten Miguel's DNA? Then she remembered, the lollipop the kindly nurse had given him during his last checkup at the free clinic. The one sponsored by the Montero Foundation. "You had no right," she began, but Don Francisco cut her off. "I had every right," he said firmly. "As the patriarch of this family, it is my duty to protect our legacy. And that includes knowing the truth about my grandchildren, all of them." With deliberate slowness, Don Francisco opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The room held its collective breath as he adjusted his glasses and began to read. "The results conclude, with 99.9% certainty, that Alejandro Montero is the biological father of Miguel Reyes." The words fell like bombshells in the stunned silence. Alejandro staggered back as if physically struck, while Valentina let out a strangled cry of rage. Diego's face twisted into a bitter smirk, as if this confirmation merely proved what he'd always suspected about his father's character. But it was Miguel's reaction that truly broke the spell. Looking up at Alejandro with wide, wondering eyes, he asked in a small voice, "Are you my papa?" Alejandro fell to his knees, coming face to face with his son for the first time. As he looked into Miguel's eyes, he felt a surge of emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. "Yes," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, I am." As father and son embraced for the first time, Sofia felt her own tears falling freely. This was the moment she had both longed for and dreaded for 5 long years. But before she could fully process her emotions, Valentina's shrill voice cut through the poignant scene. "This changes nothing," she shrieked, her carefully cultivated poise crumbling. "So what if he fathered a brat with some waitress? I'm still going to be the next Mrs. Montero." Me, not her. Alejandro rose slowly, his arms still around Miguel. He turned to face Valentina, his expression hardening. I think you should leave, he said quietly. Leave? Valentina sputtered. You can't be serious. Alejandro, darling, think about what you're saying. Think about everything we've built together, everything we've planned. But Alejandro wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on Sofia and Miguel, a lifetime of missed moments and lost opportunities flashing before his eyes. As Valentina continued to rant, Don Francisco signaled to the nurse, who quietly escorted the hysterical woman from the room. Her protests faded into the distance, leaving behind a charged silence. It was Diego who finally broke it. Well, isn't this touching, he drawled, his words slurring slightly from the whiskey he'd consumed earlier. The prodigal son returns. Tell me, dear brother, how does it feel to know you abandoned your own flesh and blood for 5 years? Alejandro flinched as if struck. I didn't know, he said softly. If I had known. You would have what? Diego pressed, his voice rising. Stepped up? Been a father? Please. You've never cared about anyone but yourself. That's enough, Diego, Isabella interjected, stepping between her brothers. This isn't helping anyone. But Diego was on a roll, years of pent-up resentment spilling out. Oh, but I'm just getting started, he sneered. You want to know the real kicker? The real reason Papa here was so eager to get that DNA test? He pulled a crumpled document from his pocket, waving it triumphantly. Turns out, little Miguel here isn't just Alejandro's son. He's the only legitimate heir to the Montero fortune. The room erupted into chaos. Alejandro lunged for the document, while Isabella tried to restrain Diego. Sofia clutched Miguel tightly, shielding him from the sudden outburst of violence. And through it all, Don Francisco sat silently, his expression unreadable as he watched his family tear itself apart. As fists flew and accusations were hurled, no one noticed the blinking red light of a hidden camera tucked away in a corner of the room. The same camera that was broadcasting every sordid detail of the Montero family drama to millions of viewers tuned into Channel 9 News. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The once mighty Montero empire teetered on the brink of collapse, its foundations shaken by long-buried secrets and lies. And at the center of it all stood Sofia and Miguel, their lives forever changed by the explosive revelations of this fateful night. As the clock struck 9 p.m., the storm that had been brewing all evening finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows of the Montero mansion, matching the tempest raging within. Lightning illuminated the faces of the assembled family members, each frozen in a tableau of shock, anger, and disbelief. In living rooms and bars across the city, viewers sat glued to their screens, watching in fascinated horror as the Montero family's dirty laundry was aired for all to see. Social media exploded with reactions, memes, and wild speculations about what would happen next. But for those inside the mansion, the world had narrowed to this one room, this one moment. As the full implications of Diego's revelation sank in, a heavy silence fell. The future of the Montero legacy hung in the balance, and no one knew quite what would happen next. The silence that had fallen over the Montero mansion was shattered by the shrill ring of a cell phone. All eyes turned to Don Francisco as he slowly reached into his pocket and withdrew the device. His weathered face remained impassive as he answered the call, listening intently for a few moments before uttering a terse, "I understand," and hanging up. It seems, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife, that our little family drama has become public entertainment. We're trending on every social media platform, and the news channels are having a field day. The weight of his words crashed down upon the assembled group. Alejandro paled visibly, while Diego let out a bitter laugh. Isabella closed her eyes, as if trying to will away the nightmare unfolding around her. But it was Sofia who spoke first, her voice trembling but determined. I never wanted this, she said, clutching Miguel close to her side. I only came here tonight to tell the truth, to give Miguel a chance to know his father. I didn't know about any of this inheritance business. Don Francisco's piercing gaze settled on Sofia. Perhaps not, he conceded. But intentions matter little in the face of consequences. And the consequences of tonight's revelations will be far-reaching indeed. As if on cue, the mansion's security system chimed, announcing the arrival of a fleet of newsvans at the gates. The outside world was closing in, hungry for more details of the scandalous story that had captivated the nation. Alejandro sprang into action, years of crisis management kicking in. "We need to get ahead of this," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Issue a statement, control the narrative before." "Before what?" Diego interrupted, his words still slurring slightly from the alcohol. "Before everyone finds out that the great Alejandro Montero abandoned his own son? That the Montero empire is built on lies and secrets? That's rich, coming from you," Isabella snapped, rounding on her brother. "How long have you known about this? How long have you been plotting to use this information for your own gain?" As the siblings descended into another heated argument, Sofia felt a small tug on her sleeve. She looked down to see Miguel, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Mama," he whispered, "I want to go home." Sofia's heart broke at the plea in her son's voice. This was supposed to be a moment of truth, of family reunification. Instead, it had devolved into a circus of accusations and revelations that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of Miguel's newfound family. "Enough." Don Francisco's voice boomed, silencing the bickering siblings. Despite his frail appearance, the old man's authority was undeniable. "This squabbling solves nothing. We are Monteros. It's time we started acting like it." He wheeled himself to the center of the room, commanding everyone's attention. "Alejandro, call our PR team. We'll issue a statement first thing in the morning. Diego, I suggest you sober up. You'll be needed for damage control. Isabella, see to our guests." His eyes flickered to Sofia and Miguel. "Make sure they're comfortable. No one leaves this house tonight." As the family scrambled to follow Don Francisco's orders, Sofia found herself being led by Isabella to a sumptuous guest suite. The room was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in shades of cream and gold that spoke of old money and refined taste. "Try to get some rest," Isabella said, her tone softer than before. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Left alone with Miguel, Sofia sank onto the plush bed, feeling utterly out of her depth. How had her simple desire to tell the truth spiraled into this maelstrom of family drama and public spectacle? Meanwhile, in Don Francisco's private study, Alejandro paced back and forth as he spoke rapidly into his phone. "I don't care what it takes," he hissed. "I want every copy of that broadcast scrubbed from the internet. Buy off the network if you have to. Just fix this." Diego slouched in a leather armchair, nursing a glass of water and looking decidedly worse for wear. "You can't put this genie back in the bottle, brother," he muttered. "The truth is out there now. No amount of money or influence can change that." Don Francisco watched his sons with a mixture of disappointment and calculation. "Perhaps," he mused, "we should not try to hide the truth, but to shape it. To use it to our advantage." Both Alejandro and Diego turned to their father, surprised by his words. "What do you mean, Papa?" Alejandro asked. A slow, cunning smile spread across Don Francisco's face. "Think about it. A long-lost heir, a rags-to-riches story. The public loves that sort of thing. If we play our cards right, we could turn this scandal into a marketing goldmine." As the Montero men began to formulate their strategy, across the mansion, Isabella sat alone in her room, torn between loyalty to her family and an unexpected empathy for Sofia and Miguel. She pulled out her phone, hesitating for a moment before sending a text to an old friend, a journalist known for his integrity and fair reporting. "There's more to the Montero story than what's being reported," she wrote. "Meet me tomorrow. I'll tell you everything." The night wore on, a storm of activity behind the mansion's imposing facade. PR teams were roused from their beds, lawyers consulted, and favors called in. By the time the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, the Monteros had a plan in place. Sofia awoke to a gentle knock on the door. She had barely slept, spending most of the night watching over Miguel as he tossed and turned, his dreams clearly troubled by the events of the evening. Opening the door, she found herself face to face with Alejandro. He looked as though he hadn't slept either, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled and tired. "We need to talk," he said softly, mindful of the still sleeping Miguel. Sofia nodded, following Alejandro to a small sitting room down the hall. As they settled into opposing armchairs, the weight of their shared past and uncertain future hung heavy between them. "I want to apologize," Alejandro began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "For everything. For leaving you, for not being there for Miguel. If I had known." "But you didn't know," Sofia interrupted gently. "Because I didn't tell you. We both made choices, Alejandro. Choices that led us here." Alejandro nodded, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "And now we have to deal with the consequences of those choices. Sofia, I want to be a part of Miguel's life. If you'll let me." Before Sofia could respond, the door opened, and Don Francisco wheeled himself in, followed closely by Diego and Isabella. "Good, you're both here," the old man said. "We have a proposition for you, Sofia." As Don Francisco outlined the family's plan, a carefully crafted narrative of lost love, noble sacrifice, and joyous reunion, Sofia felt her head spin. They wanted to turn her life, her struggles, her precious relationship with Miguel, into a public relations campaign for the Montero brand. "Absolutely not," she said firmly, cutting off Don Francisco mid-sentence. "My son is not a pawn in your corporate game. He's a little boy who deserves a normal life, away from all of this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "Be reasonable, Sofia," Alejandro pleaded. "This is a chance for Miguel to have everything he deserves. The best schools, the best opportunities. A future as the heir to the Montero fortune." Sofia stood, her eyes flashing with anger. "And what about what he already has? Love, stability, a mother who would do anything for him. Are you going to put that in your press release?" The room fell silent, the Monteros taken aback by Sofia's vehemence. It was Isabella who finally spoke up. "She's right," she said quietly. "We can't just expect Sofia and Miguel to fall in line with our plans. They're people, not PR opportunities." Don Francisco's eyes narrowed as he regarded his daughter. "And what would you suggest, Isabella? That we simply allow this scandal to destroy everything we've built?" "I suggest we tell the truth," Isabella replied, her voice growing stronger. "The whole truth. About the affair, about Miguel, about the way this family has operated for years. It's time for the secrets and lies to stop." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch as the implications of Isabella's words sank in. Diego let out a low whistle. Well, sister dear. I didn't think you had it in you." Alejandro looked between his father and sister, conflict clear on his face. "Isabella, you can't be serious. The damage to the company, to our reputation, will be nothing compared to the damage we've already done to ourselves," Isabella finished. "To Sofia, to Miguel, to countless others who've been caught in the Montero web of deception." As the family argued, Sofia slipped out of the room, returning to the guest suite where Miguel was just beginning to stir. She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing his tousled hair. "Good morning, mijo," she said softly. "How did you sleep?" Miguel rubbed his eyes, looking around the unfamiliar room with confusion. "Mama, where are we? Where's my papa?" The innocent question cut through Sofia's heart. How could she explain the complexities of the situation to her 5-year-old son? How could she protect him from the media frenzy that awaited them outside the mansion's walls? Before she could formulate a response, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was Diego who entered, looking significantly more sober than he had the night before. "The vultures are at the gate," he announced without preamble. "Every news outlet in the country is clamoring for a statement. We need to decide on our next move, and we need to do it now." Sofia stood, placing herself protectively in front of Miguel. "I've already told you my decision. I won't be a part of your PR spectacle." Diego's expression softened slightly as he looked at Miguel. "I understand your reservations, Sofia. But like it or not, Miguel is a Montero now. His life will never be the same after this. The question is, do you want to have a say in how his story is told, or are you going to let the media spin it however they please?" As Sofia grappled with this new perspective, the mansion's intercom system crackled to life. "Mr. Montero," a security guard's voice came through, sounding strained. "We have a situation at the gates. The press has broken through. They're on the grounds." The sound of distant shouting and the click of camera shutters could now be heard, growing louder by the moment. Miguel clutched at Sofia's leg, his eyes wide with fear. "We're out of time," Diego said grimly. "We need to make a decision. Now." Sofia looked down at her son, then back at Diego. In that moment, she realized that the simple life she had tried to build for Miguel was gone forever. The Montero world, with all its complexities and contradictions, was now irrevocably part of their lives. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders. "All right," she said, "but we do this my way. No lies, no spin. Just the truth, for Miguel's sake." Diego nodded, a hint of respect glimmering in his eyes. "I'll let the others know. Get ready, the world is waiting to meet the newest Montero." As Diego left to convey Sofia's decision, she knelt down to Miguel's level. "Mijo," she said gently, "there are going to be a lot of people who want to talk to us, to take our picture. But I want you to remember something very important. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, you are loved. By me, by your papa Alejandro, by this whole crazy family. Okay?" Miguel nodded solemnly, then surprised Sofia by wrapping his arms around her in a fierce hug. "I love you too, Mama," he whispered. Blinking back tears, Sofia stood, taking Miguel's hand. Together, they walked out of the room and down the grand staircase, ready to face whatever came next. In the foyer, they found the entire Montero clan assembled. Alejandro stepped forward, his eyes seeking Sofia's permission before he knelt down to Miguel's level. "Hello, Miguel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm your papa. And I want you to know that I'm so sorry for not being in your life until now. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to make up for lost time." Miguel looked up at Sofia, who nodded encouragingly. Then, with the simple acceptance that only a child can muster, he stepped forward and hugged Alejandro. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as father and son embraced for the first time. The moment was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Isabella entered, looking grim. "It's time," she said. "They're waiting." As one, the Montero family moved towards the door. But before they could step out into the media circus that awaited them, Don Francisco raised his hand. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of authority. "Before we face the world, I have something to say." All eyes turned to the family patriarch as he cleared his throat. "I've made many mistakes in my life," he began, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "I've put business before family, pride before honesty. But seeing all of you here, united despite everything, it's made me realize something. The true Montero legacy isn't in our money or our influence. It's in our ability to come together, to face adversity as one." He turned to Sofia and Miguel, his eyes softening. "Sofia, I owe you an apology. I misjudged you, and in doing so, I robbed my grandson of 5 years with his family. I hope, in time, you can forgive an old man's stubbornness." Sofia, moved by Don Francisco's unexpected humility, simply nodded. "Now," Don Francisco continued, straightening in his wheelchair, "let's go show the world what the Montero family is really made of." With that, the doors swung open, and the family stepped out onto the mansion's grand portico. A sea of flashing cameras and shouted questions greeted them, but for once, the Monteros presented a united front. As Alejandro stepped up to the hastily assembled microphones, Sofia felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to see Isabella smiling at her, a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alejandro began, his voice steady despite the tumult of the past 24 hours. "We have a story to tell you. A story of love, of loss, of mistakes made and lessons learned. But most importantly, a story of family." As Alejandro spoke, weaving a tale of redemption and reunion, Sofia realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with scrutiny and adjustment. But looking at Miguel, seeing the wonder in his eyes as he took in this new, expanded version of his family, she knew that they would face it together. The Montero family's secret was out, but from the ashes of scandal, a new chapter was beginning. One that promised to be filled with as much drama, passion, and unexpected twists as any telenovela, but this time, with love and truth at its core. In the weeks following the dramatic press conference, the Montero family found themselves at the center of a media storm unlike anything they had ever experienced. Every news channel, gossip magazine, and social media platform buzzed with speculation about the long-lost Montero heir and the waitress who had kept him hidden for 5 years. Sofia Reyes, once an anonymous single mother struggling to make ends meet, now found her face splashed across newspapers and television screens nationwide. The public couldn't get enough of her story, the humble waitress who had captured the heart of Alejandro Montero, borne his child in secret, and now stood poised to enter the world of the social elite. For Miguel, the transition was both exciting and overwhelming. One day, he was a normal 5-year-old boy. The next, he was being fitted for designer clothes and enrolled in the most prestigious private school in the city. Sofia watched with a mixture of pride and apprehension as her son navigated his new reality, torn between wanting to give him every opportunity and fearing he might lose touch with the values she had worked so hard to instill. Alejandro threw himself into fatherhood with a passion that surprised everyone, including himself. He cleared his schedule of all but the most essential business meetings, dedicating his time to bonding with Miguel and rebuilding his relationship with Sofia. The public ate up images of the doting father teaching his son to ride a bike in the mansion's sprawling gardens or taking him for ice cream in the park, flanked by discreet but ever-present security guards. But behind the scenes, tensions still simmered within the Montero clan. Diego, feeling increasingly sidelined as Alejandro focused on his newfound family, threw himself into the running of the company with a ruthless efficiency that bordered on obsession. Isabella, torn between loyalty to her brothers and her growing friendship with Sofia, found herself acting as a mediator in family disputes that threatened to spiral out of control. And then there was Valentina. The jilted fiancé had not gone quietly into the night as the Monteros had hoped. Instead, she had launched a vicious smear campaign, giving tell-all interviews to anyone who would listen about Alejandro's alleged infidelities and the Montero family's web of lies. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after the initial revelation. The entire family had gathered in Don Francisco's study for what was supposed to be a routine meeting to discuss the company's image rehabilitation strategy. Sofia and Miguel were there too, having become an integral part of these family gatherings. As Ramon, the Monteros' longtime PR manager, droned on about social media engagement metrics and brand sentiment analysis, Diego suddenly slammed his fist on the antique mahogany desk. "Enough," he roared, causing Miguel to jump and clutch at Sofia's hand. "I've had it with this circus. While we're all playing happy families for the cameras, the company is bleeding money. Our stock price has plummeted, investors are jumping ship, and all anyone seems to care about is whether Alejandro remembered to pack Miguel's lunch for school." Alejandro rose to his feet, his face flushing with anger. "Watch your tone, brother. My son is not up for discussion. If you have concerns about the company..." "Your son?" Diego spat. "You've been a father for all of 5 minutes, and suddenly you're father of the year? Where were you when I was busting my ass trying to keep this company afloat during your Playboy years?" The room erupted into chaos, with Isabella trying to calm her brothers while Don Francisco bellowed for order. Sofia, feeling overwhelmed and out of place, quietly ushered Miguel out of the room and into the hallway. As the shouting match continued behind closed doors, Sofia knelt down to Miguel's level. "Are you okay, mijo?" she asked softly, searching his face for signs of distress. Miguel nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in thought. "Mama," he said after a moment, "why is everyone so angry? I thought family was supposed to make you happy." Sofia's heart clenched at the innocent wisdom in her son's words. "Oh, Miguel," she sighed, pulling him into a hug. "Family is complicated. Sometimes the people we love the most are also the ones who can hurt us the deepest. But that doesn't mean we stop loving them." As she held her son, Sofia made a decision. This couldn't go on. The Montero family was tearing itself apart, and Miguel was caught in the crossfire. It was time for her to take a stand. With renewed determination, Sofia marched back into the study, Miguel's hand firmly in hers. The arguing ceased as everyone turned to look at them, surprise evident on their faces. "That's enough," Sofia said, her voice quiet but firm. "All of you, sit down. Now, To everyone's astonishment, including Sofia's, they complied. Even Don Francisco wheeled himself back from the desk, an unreadable expression on his weathered face. "I've been silent for too long," Sofia began, her voice gaining strength. "I've watched this family tear itself apart, all in the name of preserving some image or protecting the bottom line. But let me tell you something, none of that matters if you destroy yourselves in the process." She turned to Diego. "You're right. The company is important. It's your legacy, your father's life's work. But is it worth sacrificing your relationship with your brother? With your nephew?" Next, she addressed Alejandro. "And you've been trying so hard to make up for lost time with Miguel that you've neglected your other responsibilities. Being a good father means being a good man, and that includes being there for your family, all of your family." Sofia's gaze swept the room, taking in Isabella's tearful nod of agreement and Don Francisco's thoughtful frown. "You all talk about the Montero legacy, but what kind of legacy are you really leaving? One of greed, jealousy, and mistrust? Or one of love, forgiveness, and unity?" The silence that followed was deafening. It was Miguel who broke it, his small voice filled with a wisdom beyond his years. "I just want us to be a family," he said simply. "A real family." Those words seemed to break something open in the room. Diego's shoulders slumped, the fight going out of him. Alejandro's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his son. Isabella let out a shaky breath, reaching out to squeeze Sofia's hand in solidarity. And then, to everyone's amazement, Don Francisco began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and built into a full-bodied roar that shook his frail frame. "Oh, Sofia," he gasped when he could finally speak. "You truly are a Montero. It takes a special kind of courage to stand up to this stubborn old family. Courage that, I'm ashamed to say, has been sorely lacking around here lately." He wheeled himself to the center of the room, commanding everyone's attention. "She's right, all of you. We've lost sight of what's truly important. It's time for a change." Over the next few hours, fueled by coffee and a newfound sense of purpose, the Montero family began to hash out a new way forward. Diego and Alejandro agreed to split the company responsibilities more evenly, playing to their individual strengths. Isabella proposed a series of charitable initiatives to help rebuild the family's public image while also giving back to the community. As for Sofia and Miguel, it was agreed that they would move into a wing of the Montero mansion, but Sofia would maintain her own career and independence. "I fell in love with the waitress, not the socialite," Alejandro said softly, taking Sofia's hand. "I don't want you to change who you are." By the time the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, a new sense of unity had settled over the family. There were still challenges to face: Valentina's smear campaign, the company's financial troubles, the ongoing media scrutiny. But for the first time in years, the Monteros felt equipped to face them together. As the family began to disperse for the night, Don Francisco called Sofia back. "My dear," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "I owe you an apology. 5 years ago, I saw you as a threat to this family. Now I see that you may well be its salvation." Sofia smiled, leaning down to kiss the old man's cheek. "We're all family now," she said simply. "For better or for worse." In the months that followed, the Montero family's transformation became the stuff of legend. The story of the waitress who had brought love, humility, and unity to the powerful clan captured the public's imagination. Valentina's accusations fell on deaf ears as the Monteros presented a united front, their genuine affection for each other shining through in every interview and public appearance. The company, buoyed by a series of innovative initiatives spearheaded by Diego and supported by Alejandro, began to recover. Isabella's charitable work rehabilitated the family's image, transforming them from seen as greedy tycoons to philanthropic leaders. And at the heart of it all was Miguel, the little boy whose existence had sparked a revolution within the Montero family. He thrived under the love and guidance of his expanded family, his natural empathy and wisdom a constant reminder of the values Sofia had instilled in him. 1 year to the day after the fateful family reunion that had changed everything, the Monteros gathered once again. This time, there were no hidden cameras, no explosive secrets waiting to be revealed. Instead, there was laughter, love, and a sense of genuine joy that had been missing for far too long. As Sofia looked around at her newfound family, Alejandro by her side, Miguel playing with his cousins, Diego and Isabella engaged in friendly banter, and Don Francisco watching it all with a contented smile, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But standing there, surrounded by the love and support of the Montero clan, Sofia knew that they could weather any storm as long as they faced it together. After all, that was the true Montero legacy, not wealth or power, but the strength found in family bonds. And it was a legacy that Sofia was proud to be a part of, now and for all the days to come. As the sun set on another day in the life of the Montero family, Sofia raised her glass in a toast. To family, she said, her voice filled with emotion. In all its complicated, messy, beautiful glory. To family, the others echoed, their glasses clinking together in a promise of unity and love that would endure for generations to come. And so, the story of the waitress who gave birth to the millionaire's son came to an end, or perhaps, more accurately, to a new beginning. For in the world of the Monteros, every ending was just the start of a new chapter, full of passion, drama, and the enduring power of family.